The PS1 era was the Wild West of game design. Developers were basically hacking the hardware to see what they could get away with. These games are high-tier collectibles now for a reason. They're masterpieces, and definitely worth your time, whether you're playing the retro originals or just the new shiny ports. These are the PS1 legends that still rock in 2026. In 1998, I rented Xenogears, thinking it was just a cool game about giant robots. It was originally pitched as a script for Final Fantasy VII, but the story was deemed too dark and philosophically heavy for a mainline entry, resulting in a psychological sci-fi epic that swaps crystal chasing for deep dives into Gnosticism and Jungian psychology. You play as Fei Fong Wong, a man who accidentally levels his home village with a giant mecha and spends the next 80 hours questioning if he is a savior or a walking extinction event. The development is a case study in high-concept ambition, hitting a brick wall of budget constraints. By the time the team reaches Disc 2, they had run out of resources to build out the world. Instead of cutting the ending, they had the characters sit in chairs against static backdrops, narrating the massive battles they were having off screen. It sounds like a total disaster, but the writing is so raw that it actually works.
Ironic.
Honestly, the shift from a traditional RPG is the kind of experimental risk you just don't see anymore. The game used 2D sprites on a fully 3D environment, allowing you to rotate the camera to find hidden paths. On the original gray box, the low-res sprites have a gritty, dithered texture that fits the dark tone perfectly. It's also a high-tier collectible now. Grabbing a mint copy will cost you a small fortune, but for a story that tackles the nature of God, existence, and giant robots, it's worth the shelf space. This is the shit that stays with you long after the power's off.
He will lead my Cortex Commandos to world domination.
People talk about Mario and Sonic, but for a certain generation, Crash Bandicoot was the king of the hallway platformer. Going back to the original PS1 trilogy today is a massive reality check. We all remember it being this colorful, fun mascot romp. They realized the official Sony libraries for 3D math were too slow, so they bypassed them entirely and wrote their own code to squeeze every last drop of power out of the PS1's custom CPU. The game was pushing so many polygons that they had to create a custom paging system to stream geometry off the disk in real time. If the disk drive slowed down for even a second, the game would crash, literally. On original hardware today, that technical wizardry is still evident. The movement is tight, and the frame rate is surprisingly consistent because the game is so optimized it's practically hardwired into the silicon. There's a specific kind of panic that only sets in when you're sprinting towards the screen away from a giant boulder. The first crash doesn't even give you a slide or a double jump. It's just raw, unfiltered jumping. It's the kind of game that makes you want to bite your controller. Yet you keep coming back because the rhythm is just that good.
What have I got?
If Resident Evil 2 was the blockbuster sequel, Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, is the frantic, adrenaline-fueled panic attack that closed out the trilogy on the PS1. You're back in the boots of Jill Valentine, who is basically just trying to leave Raccoon City before the government turns it into a crater. The problem is she's being stalked by a 9-foot-tall biological weapon.
Over here!
The development of this game was actually a bit of a scramble. Originally, it wasn't even supposed to be the main third entry. The title was reserved for what eventually became Code Veronica. Capcom realized they needed another hit on the PS1, so they tasked a smaller team to turn a spin-off project into a full sequel in less than a year. Running this on a PS1 today is a technical treat, because it represents the absolute peak of what Capcom could do with pre-rendered backgrounds. They used a trick where they overlay 3D objects and fire effects onto the static images to make the city feel alive and burning. On original hardware, the Nemesis encounters are still genuinely terrifying, because the console's limited RAM meant that when the music changed and the disk drive started seeking data frantically, you knew you were about to be in a fight for your life. There's a specific crunch to the audio on the original hardware, that modern remasters actually lose. That lo-fi scream of the Nemesis sounds way more menacing when it's coming through the PS1's internal DAC. She's running through a city filled with infectious monsters while wearing a tube top and a sweater tied around her waist. It's like she got prepared for a rave that accidentally got relocated to a morgue. And then there's Carlos, the mercenary with the most I'm in a 90s boy band hair imaginable, who spends half the game trying to flirt with Jill while everything around them literally explodes. It has that perfect blend of B-movie camp and genuine dread. And even in 2026, it's still the best version of that feeling you can get on a console. If you want to understand the exact moment video games decided they wanted to be Hollywood movies, look no further than Metal Gear Solid. It's essentially Die Hard. If Bruce Willis spent half the movie hiding in a cardboard box and debating the ethics of genetic engineering with a man in a gas mask. The development behind this is pure Hideo Kojima madness. Before coding even started in mid-1995, Kojima and his team were obsessed with realism.
Is that right?
Snake, I'm counting on you.
To design the levels, they built the entire Shadow Moses base out of Lego blocks so they could physically move the camera around and see what angles worked best for a stealth game. They even hand-animated the characters instead of using motion capture.
But it looks like our little diversion got their attention.
Running Metal Gear Solid on original hardware today is still the purest way to experience it. It's mostly because the game is famous for breaking the fourth wall. There's a specific boss fight with Psycho Mantis where the game reads your memory card to comment on other games you played, and you literally have to plug your controller into the second port. While modern emulators like DuckStation do an amazing job of upscaling the resolution and fixing the polygon wobble that was a staple of the PS1, you can't quite replicate the tactile weirdness of switching controller ports or checking the back of a physical CD case for a codec frequency. It's a game that was built around the physical limitations and quirks of the console, making it a masterpiece of technical and creative synergy that still feels genius decades later. Now, if you want a combat system that actually requires you to do more than just mash the X button until your thumb goes numb, Legend of Legaia is your game. In a world covered by a lethal purple mist, it's a bleak atmospheric game that feels much more desperate than your average Final Fantasy adventure. The development team at Contrail wanted to shake up the turn-based formula, so they created the tactical art system. Instead of just selecting attack, you input directional commands, up, down, left, right, to create combos. It's basically a fighting game engine disguised as a JRPG. On original hardware, the game is a bit of a technical oddity. The characters look like typical low-poly PS1 models, but as soon as you enter a battle, the engine shifts. The models transform into much more detailed, fluidly animated fighters that show the armor and weapons you've equipped, a feature that was incredibly rare back then. That was a clever way to manage the PS1's limited 2 megabytes of RAM. The sound design is the real winner on the original console though. Every punch, kick, and special hyper art has a specific crunchy impact that feels incredibly satisfying. It's also surprisingly punishing if you don't learn the right art combinations or forget to spirit to defend against big attacks. The bosses will absolutely steamroll you into the dirt. It's a game that rewards experimentation, and a cult classic for a reason. It took a tired genre and gave it some actual muscle. When you talk about PS1, you're talking about the three-headed dragon that was Final Fantasy VII, VIII, and IX. This trilogy represents the most aggressive evolution of a single franchise on one console. Final Fantasy VII was the game that broke the door down in 1997. It was a massive technical gamble. Square ditched Nintendo because they needed the storage space of CDs. The development team was the largest in gaming history at the time, with over 100 people throwing caution to the wind. Honestly, the first time you leave Midgar and the camera pulls back to show the world map, it's a moment that stays with you forever. It also features Sephiroth, a villain who is so cool he makes burning down a village look like a fashion choice. And then came Final Fantasy VIII, which pushed the PS1 technology even further by attempting realistic human proportions and integrating FMVs directly into gameplay. They built on the proprietary engine from FF7 to make a game that looks significantly better. Finally, FF9 was the series' love letter to its own roots, returning to a fantasy setting with airships, knights, and a protagonist who has a literal tail. By 2000, Square had become wizards of the hardware. The sprites and environments in FF9 are arguably the best looking on the entire console, using every ounce of the PS1's power to create a lush, living world. Our next game is a classic and one of my personal favorites. Parasite Eve is a great game on PS1. You play as Ayabria, a rookie NYPD officer who goes to the opera on Christmas Eve, only to watch everyone in the audience spontaneously combust. It turns out your mitochondria are having a bit of a revolution, and a woman named Eve is leading the charge to turn humanity into primordial soup. It's essentially a biological thriller that makes you want to apologize to your own selves for everything you've ever put them through. The development of this game was a massive deal because it was the first project from Square USA, and they leaned hard into the cinematic RPG branding. They hired a team in New York to capture the authentic vibe of the city, which is why the pre-rendered backgrounds of Central Park, the American Museum of Natural History, and NYPD's 17th Precinct look so incredibly evocative. This crew was pushing the PS1 to create a grit-covered, realistic version of Manhattan. They even use a unique combat system, where you can move freely in 3D space during your turn to dodge attacks, while waiting for your ATB bar to fill. It was way ahead of its time, feeling more like a proto-action RPG than a traditional turn-based slog. There's a specific kind of graininess to the PS1's video output that makes the body horror cutscenes, like a dog transforming into a multi-headed monster, look way more disturbing than they do in high definition. It's also one of the best sounding games on the system. The soundtrack by Yoko Shimomura is a haunting mix of operatic vocals and industrial techno that perfectly captures the Christmas in hell. It's a short, tight 10-hour experience that proves Square was at its absolute best when they were experimenting with dark, weird ideas. If you're tired of the chosen hero trope being a boring farm boy who finds a rusty spoon in a chest, let me introduce you to Ryu from Breath of Fire 3. He's a kid who could literally turn into a massive fire-breathing dragon because of his DNA. You start the game as a small, naked dragon found frozen in a mine. It's a slow burn story that actually spans years of the protagonist's life, showing him as both a child and an adult, which gives the whole journey a level of emotional weight you don't usually see in 32-bit RPGs. Breath of Fire 3 combined fluidly animated 2D characters with a 3D isometric world. This gave it a clean, timeless look that still holds up beautifully on a modern screen. The standout feature, though, is the gene system. Honestly, spending 3 hours to try and figure out how to turn into a golden dragon just to flex on a mid-game boss is a rite of passage for any self-respecting fan. This one highlights the PS1's ability to handle the high-quality 2D animation, alongside a jazz-inspired soundtrack that shouldn't work for a fantasy game. It sounds like it belongs in a rooftop lounge in Tokyo, but somehow it hits perfectly. The only downside? The fishing minigame. It's so deep and punishingly addictive that you'll probably forget you have an entire world to save. It's a game with massive heart, a killer art style, and just enough what-the-hell moments to keep it interesting 30 years later. The Legend of Dragoon. This was Sony's Final Fantasy killer, a 4-disc epic that took over 3 years and a team of over 100 people to build. They wanted to take everything people loved about Final Fantasy VII, the cinematic FMVs, the high-stakes plot, the brooding protagonist, and turn the dial to 11. You play as Dart, a guy in red armor who discovers he can transform into a dragoon, a winged warrior with the power of an ancient dragon. It's basically Power Rangers if it were directed by a high fantasy nerd with a massive corporate budget and a grudge against Square. The technical ambition here was through the roof for 1999. The pre-rendered backgrounds are some of the most detailed on the system. They also introduced the addition system, which added a rhythmic, timing-based element to every single physical attack. You couldn't just look away or go get a snack during a battle. You had to time your button presses perfectly to complete combos, which kept the gameplay from feeling stale across its 60-hour runtime. The transformation sequences were also a huge technical flex, pushing the PS1 to its limits with practical effects and lighting that felt next-gen at the time. Playing this on an original PS1 today is a trip, because you can feel the sheer effort Sony put into every frame. The disc swapping is frequent and the load times are a bit longer than other games, but the payoff is a cinematic experience that still feels massive. Honestly, the English translation is famously charming. Characters will scream things like "Volcano!" with the intensity of 1,000 suns during attacks, but that's a part of the PS1 era soul. It's a game that was built to be a masterpiece. It carved out a legacy as one of the most visually impressive and mechanically unique RPGs of the 32-bit era. Before Rockstar became a household name for high-definition crime simulations, they were DMA Design. Set in the retro-futuristic Anywhere USA, you play as Claude Speed. He's a freelance chaos consultant to 7 different gangs. It's essentially a 90s action movie directed by someone who had a little too much sugar and a library of car chase VHS tapes. The development of GTA II is a masterclass in squeezing blood from a stone. DMA Design built a brand new engine that introduced smooth dynamic camera zooming. The PS1 version had to make some sacrifices, like losing the subway and a whole district called Mad Island, but it kept the soul of the series intact. While the PC and Dreamcast versions offered different times of day, the PS1 is locked into high noon because the hardware just couldn't handle the dynamic shadows of a nighttime city. It's a game that demands you embrace the chaos, mostly because the aiming controls are still a bit like trying to steer a shopping trolley through a car wash. It's raw, it's noisy, and it's a perfect snapshot of a series just before it changed the world forever.
1034 in Northwest Omnitron.
If you want an RPG that replaces the usual save-the-world optimism with a somber Norse-inspired meditation on death and sacrifice, Valkyrie Profile is the one. You play as Lyneth Valkyrie, a divine recruiter for Odin. It's essentially an HR manager for the Afterlife simulator, but with much more swordplay and significantly more depression. It's one of the most visually stunning games on the system, trading blocky 3D for exquisite 2D sprite work that still looks like a moving anime today.
We may be in trouble.
Developed by Tri-Ace, the geniuses behind Star Ocean, the combat system is a work of art. Each of your 4 party members is mapped to one of the 4 main face buttons: square, triangle, circle, X, and you time your presses to create massive juggling combos. It's hilarious because the game basically gaslights you. If you play it normally, you'll get a mediocre ending, but to get the true ending, you have to follow a series of cryptic counterintuitive steps that nobody in their right mind would find without a guide. Playing Valkyrie Profile is a luxury experience, mostly because a physical copy costs more than a decent used car. The game is a race against time, giving you 192 periods to recruit souls before the world ends. It creates that constant, looming dread that makes every dungeon choice feel heavy. It's a masterpiece that manages to be both beautiful and brutal, proving that even on a console full of legends, there's nothing else quite like it. Now let's talk about the undisputed king of 32-bit fighting world, Tekken 3. When this hit the PS1 in 1998, it was a technical miracle that defied the laws of physics. Namco managed to take a game running on high-end System 12 arcade hardware and squeeze it onto a console with about 2 megabytes of RAM. They did this by using high-resolution 2D backgrounds and incredibly clever animation techniques. Honestly, at the time it looked so good people thought they were playing a PS2 game 3 years early. The development of this sequel was all about speed and depth. The roster is legendary. You got Jin Kazama, the brooding protagonist, Eddie Gordo, the man who made every younger brother feel like a pro by just mashing buttons, and Gon, a tiny orange dinosaur that was only in the game because of a licensing deal. It has the perfect blend of hardcore fighting mechanics and absolute 90s eccentricity. Playing this today is still the ultimate way to settle a grudge with your friends. While you can play solo, Tekken 3 was built for that specific brand of basement-dwelling rivalry, where the only thing louder than the game is the trash talking. It's one of the few titles that push the console to its absolute limit, featuring motion-captured animations that still look fluid today, which makes it even more satisfying when you land a perfectly timed counter. Even the loading times are short, so there's no downtime between rounds of kicking your friend's ass. If you want to know why the PlayStation won the console war, just grab a second controller and try to land a burning fist with Paul Phoenix. It's pure, distilled, arcade joy shared with a rival. Ape Escape. Released in 1999, it was a high-stakes tactical demo for the DualShock. If you tried to play this with the original digital controller, the game would basically look at you and say, no. The development was handled by Sony's Japan studio, and they used the twin sticks to do something revolutionary. The left stick moved Spike, but the right stick controlled your gadgets, spinning the hula hoop, rowing the boat, or swinging the stun club in 360 degrees. It felt alien at first, but once you got the rhythm of sneak crawling behind a monkey named Apra, you realized this was the future of gaming. It's hilarious because the monkeys actually have more personality than most modern NPCs. Running this on original hardware is non-negotiable because of those sticks. Modern emulators can mimic it, but there's a specific mechanical click and tension to the original DualShock sticks that make the gadget switching feel tactile and right. On the PS1, the game is surprisingly vibrant. They used a lot of bright, flat textures to mask the console's limited polygon count, which makes it one of the few 3D games of that era that doesn't look like a pile of brown sludge today. It's pure chaotic joy that reminds you why we started putting two sticks on controllers in the first place. Then we have PaRappa the Rapper, the game that essentially taught a generation of gamers that they had absolutely no sense of rhythm. You play as a paper-thin dog with a beanie, who's trying to win the heart of a sunflower named Sunny Funny.
Like to go to the beach with me?
Sure, only if all of us can go.
To do this, he has to learn karate from an onion, get a driver's license from a moose, and most importantly, not poop his pants in a line for the bathroom. It's 90s surrealism at its absolute peak. The development was a collaboration between legendary producer Masaya Matsuura and artist Rodney Greenblatt. They wanted to create a living storyboard, which is why everyone is 2D and paper-thin in a 3D world. It's a brilliant technical workaround for the PS1. By keeping the characters flat, they could focus the console's power on the colorful, trippy backgrounds and the CD-quality audio. This was one of the first games to prove that the PlayStation wasn't just a toy for kids. It was a cool lifestyle machine that could deliver music-driven experiences. Playing this on original hardware today is a massive reality check. The timing window for the button presses is notoriously tight, borderline broken. If you're even a millisecond off, Chop Chop Master Onion will look at you with pure disappointment. On a modern TV, the input lag from the HDMI conversion will make this game almost impossible to play. So this is the ultimate CRT and original console title. There's something incredibly satisfying about the crunchy compressed vocals of the PS1 era that the clean 4K remasters just can't replicate. It's short, it's weird, and the songs will stay stuck in your head for the next 20 years. Our next game is Jade Cocoon, and it might be exactly what you're looking for. You play as Levant, a young cocoon master in a village surrounded by a lethal monster-infested forest. Your job is to venture into the deep woods, capture minions, and purify them to save your people from an eternal slumber. It's essentially a dark tribal take on the monster-taming genre that swaps out Pokeballs for magical silk threads and upbeat tunes for a somber, atmospheric soundtrack. The development of this team is its biggest flex. They actually got Katsuya Terada, the legendary character designer who worked on The Legend of Zelda and Blood, to handle the art direction. Because of this, the game looks incredible. While other devs were struggling with 3D environments, Jade Cocoon used gorgeous, hand-painted pre-rendered backgrounds that made the force feel dense, ancient, and alive. But the real technical wizardry was the merging system. Unlike other games where you just evolve a monster, Jade Cocoon lets you physically fuse two minions together, creating a brand new creature that inherits the physical traits of both. You can end up with some truly cursed-looking abominations. And the PS1 somehow rendered these hybrid models on the fly. It was a massive technical achievement for 1998. The fact that Jade Cocoon is fully voice-acted is a massive rarity for an RPG from 1998.
I am glad you returned safely. Did you obtain the second jewel?
On the PS1, those compressed voice files have this specific grainy texture that actually adds to the tribal lo-fi aesthetic of the world. It's a game that almost demands you to play on a CRTV if you can. Those pre-rendered forests look like lush, hand-painted oil paintings on a tube TV, whereas modern upscalers can make them look a bit like digital soup. The only thing more memorable than the strange nightmare-fuel monster mashups created through fusion is the fact that the protagonist's marriage serves as a central gameplay mechanic. Levant's wife, Mabu, is the one who purifies the monster for the use. This integration of personal narrative and mechanical progression is a short, high-concept approach that proves the PS1 was a breeding ground for experimental ideas that modern AAA developers are often too hesitant to explore. It's the kind of original experience that stays with a player because it's so unshamedly weird, original, and atmospheric. Look, if you think Final Fantasy is just about spiky-haired teenagers crying over crystals, Final Fantasy Tactics is here to ruin your life in the best way possible. It's a brutal, politically charged war drama that feels like Game of Thrones if everyone was 3 feet tall and drawn by a genius. You play as Ramza Baluv, a noble caught in the War of the Lions. Conflict so messy and full of betrayal that you'll need a whiteboard just to keep track of who's stabbing who in the back this week. It's easily the most mature story Square ever put on the PS1, and honestly, it's arguably the best game they've ever made. They traded the traditional side-view battles for a 3D isometric grid. If you leave your back exposed to an archer on a hill, you're dead. They also introduced the job system on steroids. You could turn your characters into anything from a basic squire to a time-traveling calculator who nukes the entire map based on their current level. It's hilarious because the game is famous for its soft locks. If you save your game inside a castle before a major boss fight and your team isn't ready, you might as well throw your memory card in the bin and start over. It's the kind of ruthless design that builds character. On the original gray box, the spells fire off instantly. The music by Hitoshi Sakimoto sounds punchy and orchestral, and the loading times are actually manageable. It's a masterclass of strategy that proves you don't need fancy graphics when you have a plot this thick and a gameplay loop that makes 4 AM feel like 10 PM. I still remember the first time I popped this disc into my PS1. The opening cinematic alone felt like a punch to the gut. If you want a gothic masterpiece that feels more like a dark Shakespearean tragedy than a video game, Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver is an absolute essential. You play as Raziel, a vampire lieutenant who is literally executed by his creator Kain for the crime of growing cool wings before his boss did. Resurrected as a soul-devouring wraith with a scarf for a jaw, you return to the decaying world of Nosgoth to hunt down your former brothers. It's one of the most narratively ambitious games of the era, featuring voice acting from legends like Tony Jay that still puts most modern prestige games to shame.
Nosgoth teeters on the brink of collapse. Its fragile balance cannot hold.
Technically, Soul Reaver was a miracle, developed by Crystal Dynamics and Amy Hennig, the future genius behind Uncharted. It featured a data streaming engine that allowed for a massive world with 0 loading screens, a feat that Sony engineers thought was impossible for the PS1. It also introduced a brilliant plane shifting mechanic, where you could instantly switch between the material and spectral realms to solve puzzles. The world literally warps around you in real time, twisting the geometry of the levels on the fly. While a remastered collection recently dropped for modern consoles, the original PS1 version has a specific dark aesthetic that feels right on a CRT. It's a high-tier collectible now, and for good reason. It's a game that treats its audience like adults, offering a complex story in a world that feels genuinely ancient and cursed. Before she was a gritty survivalist in the modern reboots, Lara Croft was the queen of the precise platformer, and Tomb Raider 2 is arguably her PS1 peak. This time Lara is hunting the Dagger of Xi'an, giving Lara more moves, bigger environments, and a literal arsenal of weapons to deal with everything from cult members to snarling snow leopards. The development by Core Design was a bigger and better sequel in every way. They introduced vehicles for the first time like snowmobiles and speedboats, and expanded the engine to handle massive open exterior environments. It cemented Lara as a global icon, even if her character model was still mostly made of sharp triangles. While the Tomb Raider 1 through 3 remastered collection is great for modern convenience, there's something about the original's rigid, grid-based platforming. The controls are unrepentantly tanky, but they were designed for the original D-pad to give you absolute control. Finding original copies is relatively easy, making it a staple for any collector's shelf. Plus, we have to talk about the mansion level. It's a rite of passage for every 90s kid to lock the long-suffering butler Winston in the walk-in freezer, just to hear him groan while you practice your swan dives. It's a snapshot of a time when games were unapologetically tough, and Lara Croft was the coolest person on the planet. Oddworld, Abe's Oddysee.
This is Rupture Farms.
The development of this game is actually legendary, because the team at Oddworld Inhabitants, led by Lauren Lanning, came from a high-end Hollywood visual effects background. These guys doubled down on 2D. They used massive SGI workstations, the stuff they used for Jurassic Park, to pre-render every background and character. This is why when you boot it up on a PS1 today, it still looks like a high-budget animated film rather than a collection of moving cereal boxes. They also built a proprietary Alive engine, just to handle the way enemies and allies react to you. It was a massive technical gamble, creating a world that feels lived in a way few games since have managed. Playing this on original hardware is a special kind of vibe. On a modern PC or emulator, you often deal with input lag or weird scaling. That makes the precision platforming feel like you're playing in a vat of syrup. You need that responsiveness, because this game is an absolute There's no combat. Abe can't punch or shoot. His only defense is chanting to possess enemies or using game speak to tell his buddies to wait or follow me. It's actually hilarious.
Follow me.
Honestly, the first time you try to lead a secret revolution and end up whistling the tune while your friends get turned into sausage, you realize this game has a dark, twisted sense of humor that most modern titles are too scared to touch.
So, get me out of here!
Perhaps the same could be said of all religions.
Then we have Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, the game that essentially told the 3D or bust trend of 1997 to take a hike. While everyone else was making jaggy, ugly polygons that aged like milk, Konami doubled down on 2D art so beautiful, it still looks like a movie painting today. You play as Alucard, the son of Dracula, who apparently inherits his father's taste for high-collared capes and dramatic entrances. You're infiltrating your dad's castle to stop a priest from resurrecting him. But it quickly turns into a massive non-linear exploration of every dark corner, secret passage, and breakable wall in the building. Development-wise, this was a massive pivot for the series. Assistant director Koji Igarashi took the classic whip and walk right formula and smashed it together with the exploration of Metroid and the gear systems of a JRPG. Running this on an original console today is pure gaming comfort. The controls are buttery smooth, and there's zero input lag, which you absolutely need for some of the late game boss fights. Because it's a CD-based game, they used Red Book audio to deliver a mix of gothic rock and classical music. That sounds incredible. It's also home to some of the most so-bad-it's-good voice acting in history. The opening dialogue with Richter Belmont calls Dracula a miserable pile of secrets.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk!
Suikoden II is one of the best JRPGs you've probably never played. Why? Because Konami barely released it in the West. It came out in North America in 1999, limited print run, almost no marketing, and in the same year as Final Fantasy VII. It bombed commercially, and turned into this legendary if you know game. The story follows Ryo and Jawi, two childhood friends caught in a war between the city-states and the Highland Kingdom. Early on, they're forced onto opposite sides of the conflict. The game explores their friendship, showing both perspectives as the war escalates. It's a tragedy in the classical sense. You see the betrayal coming, you understand why it happens, and you can't stop it. The game's strength is its scope. You recruit 108 characters, the stars of destiny, to build your army and your headquarters. Some join through story events, others through side quests. You get a blacksmith, a chef, an inventor, a theater troupe. Your headquarters grows from a run-down castle into a bustling war camp. The combat is fast, turn-based with 6 party members, but battles rarely drag. You've got one-on-one duels, massive war battles using rock-paper-scissors strategy, and regular encounters. The music by Miki Higashino is understated but perfect. Melancholic, somber, fitting for a war story. This game didn't review widely at launch because so few people played it. The ones who did praised it as one of the generation's best. It's been re-released on PSN and modern platforms, so it's easier to access now. Our next game had an impossible task. Follow up Chrono Trigger, one of the most beloved RPGs ever made. Square's solution? Don't make Chrono Cross a direct sequel. Make something completely different, set in the same universe with only loose connections to the original. It was bold. It was polarizing. People still argue about it today. You play as a silent protagonist who discovers he's dead in an alternate dimension, crossing between 2 parallel worlds. You uncover a conspiracy involving the Frozen Flame, a fragment of Lavos, the villain from Chrono Trigger, and the fate of reality itself. Combat uses a stamina system where weak attacks cost less stamina, but build up to stronger attacks. Elements replace magic, color-coded spells tied to a field affect systems that change based on what you cast. The problem? There are 45 recruitable characters. Most of them are underdeveloped. You'll recruit someone, use them for an hour, and never touch them again. A few have meaningful arcs, Kid, Lynx, Harley, but the majority are just bodies filling out your roster. The soundtrack by Yusunori Mitsuda is phenomenal. Time Scar, Radical Dreamers, Dragon God, some of the best music on PS1. The world design is vibrant and tropical, a huge departure from Chrono Trigger's time-hopping structure. The dual world mechanic is cool in concept but underutilized in execution. The connection to Chrono Trigger is both its biggest selling point and its biggest weakness. Still looking back, the game is a lot of fun to play on the PS1. If you judge it on its own merits, Chrono Cross is a beautiful, mechanically interesting RPG with an ambitious story that's worth checking out. Vagrant Story came out in 2000, and it's one of the weirdest games Square ever made. It's part dungeon crawler, part action RPG, and part Shakespearean political theater. Director Yasumi Matsuno wanted a game with no world map, no shops, and no towns. Just one giant interconnected city that felt like a tomb. Set in the same world as Final Fantasy Tactics, it follows Ashley Riot, a risk breaker, basically a special ops agent, investigating a cult leader in the cursed city of Liamonte. The story is dense. Political conspiracies, religious manipulation, memory manipulation, and an artifact called the Dark. The dialogue is written in medieval English, tis, thou, hast, which gives it a theatrical vibe, but also makes it hard to follow. The combat is real-time but tactical. You target enemy body parts, chain attacks, and manage weapon durability. Different weapon types are effective against different enemy types, Blunt weapons for skeletons, piercing for beasts, edged for humanoids. You craft and customize weapons, adjusting their affinities to match what you're fighting. It's deep, but the game does a terrible job explaining it. The lighting and shadow effects in the limestone dungeons create an atmosphere so thick you can practically smell the damp. It's a dark, gritty, and unrepentantly difficult masterpiece that proves Square was the king of the 32-bit era. Alright folks, that's the list. Please leave us a like if you found a new game. Thanks for watching.